I was lying in a private room at Emory in Atlanta when my husband leaned in, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Only 3 days, then everything's mine." My stomach dropped because he said it like he was finally about to breathe again. I watched him switch into the perfect grieving husband the moment a nurse walked in, and I realized I wasn't married to a man in pain. I was married to a man finishing a plan. They were already dividing my life while I was still alive, and they thought I was too weak to notice. They believed they were in control, but they had no idea what I had already put in motion. Friends, before we dive into this story, I want to ask for a small favor. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it if my story moves you. And leave a comment telling me which country and city you're listening from. The room smells like disinfectant and recycled air, that sharp hospital mix that never quite lets you forget where you are. I'm flat on my back, sheets tucked too tight around my legs, the heart monitor ticking out my existence in polite little beeps. My body feels wrong, heavy and hollow at the same time, like something important already left and forgot to take the rest of me with it. Ethan is sitting beside my bed, close enough that I can feel the warmth of his arm through the blanket. He's been like that all morning, attentive, gentle, playing the part well. Then he leans in, squeezes my hand just a little too hard, and lowers his voice. 3 days, he says softly, not cruel, not rushed, confident. That's all. Then everything's mine. For a second, I think I misheard him, like my brain is filling in something too ugly to be real. But his breath is warm on my cheek, his fingers firm around mine, grounding the words exactly where they land. 3 days. Everything's mine. The room doesn't spin. I don't gasp. Instead, something inside my chest goes cold and sharp, like ice cracking. Fear hits first, fast and physical, a tightness that squeezes my lungs harder than whatever's already killing me. Not fear of dying. Fear of losing what I built while I'm still here to feel it happening. I stare at the ceiling because I don't trust my face. The tiles blur a little, not from tears, but from the sudden pressure behind my eyes. My stomach rolls like I swallowed something frozen and it's burning its way down. I think of the first warehouse I signed a lease on, my hands shaking but steady enough to hold the pen. I think of 14-hour days, of choosing payroll over my own rent, of walking through doors where I wasn't expected and making myself seen anyway. All of it flashes through me in jagged pieces because now it has a price tag attached to it, and that price is my body failing in this bed. Ethan pulls back, watches my face carefully, measuring. I keep my expression slack, tired, scared in the way he expects. Inside, though, my thoughts are racing, loud and messy. When did he stop being my husband and start becoming this? Or was he always this, and I just ignored the signs because they didn't fit the picture I wanted? He presses his lips together, gives me that sad little smile he saves for doctors and nurses, like grief already owns him. I realize he's been preparing for this moment, rehearsing it, waiting for the day he could finally say those words out loud. And that realization hurts in a deeper way than fear ever could. The door opens and a nurse steps in with a clipboard, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor. Ethan straightens instantly, his whole posture shifting like someone flipped a switch. He smooths my blanket, brushes my hair back from my forehead, his thumb gentle against my temple. "How are we feeling?" he asks, voice warm, concerned, practiced. The nurse smiles at him like he's something rare and good, like she's watching a love story instead of a slow theft. I play my part too. I let my eyelids droop, let my breathing hitch just enough to sell the weakness. I hate how easy it is. The nurse checks my IV, asks me questions in that careful tone meant for fragile things, and I answer slowly, quietly, letting Ethan do most of the talking. He fills the space with worry and devotion, tells her he hasn't left my side, tells her we're taking everything one day at a time. I want to laugh at how false it all sounds now that I can hear the truth underneath it. When the nurse leaves, he stays in character for a few seconds longer, like he hasn't fully stepped out of the role yet. Then his shoulders relax, just a bit. That tiny shift tells me everything. This isn't an accident. This isn't impatience or stress talking. This is ownership. He already thinks he's won. He adjusts the chair and sits back down, still holding my hand, still close. My skin crawls where he touches me, but I don't pull away. I force myself to stay still, to breathe evenly, to keep my reactions small. Inside my head, questions pile up faster than I can sort them. What else has he planned? Who else knows? How long has he been waiting for my body to give out? I feel stupid for all the moments I dismissed as nothing. His sudden interest in simplifying paperwork, his casual questions about beneficiaries, the way he'd talk about my company like it was already a separate thing from me. At the same time, a different feeling starts to cut through the fear. Anger. Not hot, explosive anger, but a cold, controlled kind that sharpens my focus. I realize something important in that bed, staring at the man who thinks I'm already halfway gone. He believes I'm weaker than I am. He believes my body failing means my mind is already off the table. That assumption settles deep in my chest, heavy but useful. If he thinks the end is close, he'll drop his guard. If he thinks I'm fading, he won't see what's coming. I don't need to confront him, not yet. I need him comfortable, confident, patient for 3 more days. By the time afternoon light starts slanting through the window, I've stopped shaking inside. Ethan chats about meaningless things, about emails he needs to answer, about doctors not explaining enough. I nod when I'm supposed to, squeeze his hand back just enough to keep the illusion alive. My fear hasn't disappeared, but it's changed shape. It's quieter now, packed tight behind my ribs, mixed with something steadier. Calculation. I listen more than I speak. I watch how he checks his phone, how he reacts to updates from the hallway, how he already moves through this room like it's his space alone. Every detail files itself away in my head. I tell myself to remember this feeling, this exact clarity, because I know how easy it will be later to doubt myself, to soften what I heard, to blame my own sickness. I promise myself I won't do that. My body is failing me, yes, but my mind is painfully awake. When Ethan finally leaves to talk to the doctor, I let my face fall for real for the first time. My chest tightens, not with panic, but with grief for something very specific. The marriage I thought I had, the safety I thought existed here. I don't cry. I don't pray. I just stare at the door and accept what this moment has taught me. As evening approaches, I focus on one simple, grounding action. Breathing. In through my nose, slow. Out through my mouth, slower. Counting each breath like it's a rope keeping me tethered to this side of things. I let myself look sick. I let the machine speak louder than I do. Inside, though, everything is lining up. 3 days, he said. That number repeats in my head, not as a deadline, but as a window. Time works differently when someone thinks you're already done. I decide, right there, before anyone else comes back into the room, that I will not confront him, will not tip my hand, will not give him the satisfaction of seeing the damage he just caused. I will be the quiet patient, the tired wife, the woman everyone underestimates because it's easier that way. As the lights dim and footsteps pass by my door, I settle into the role with intention. Let him believe the end is close. Let him believe I'm slipping away. I'm counting something too now. Not days, but opportunities. And for the first time since I woke up in this bed, I feel a thin, stubborn thread of control wrapping itself back around my spine. I was already sitting in the wheelchair when Ethan wheeled me into the family lounge. The room was cold in that sterile hospital way, fake plants in the corners, stale air, and a big round table in the middle like we were about to have some board meeting. I hated how small I felt, bundled in layers, too weak to sit upright without pillows. Then I saw them walk in. His mother first, then his sister right behind, holding a greasy brown paper bag that smelled like lemon pepper wings. They walked in all smiles like we were having a picnic instead of a damn crisis. "We brought your favorite," his mom said, laying out the food like she was being generous. I couldn't even eat. My throat was too dry, my body too nauseous, but I nodded and forced a smile. Because I already knew this wasn't about lunch. I could feel it in my bones. They were here for something else. I just didn't know what yet. Ethan stepped out to make a call, and the second he did, the whole temperature shifted. I sat there frozen, the smell of fried food turning my stomach while they got down to business. His sister, Vanessa, pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table like it was nothing. She didn't look at me when she said it, just kept her eyes on the folder. "We thought it might be smart to simplify some things," she said, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the top. "While you still can." I felt my heart spike. That phrase, "while you still can," landed in my chest like a fist. My hands were shaking a little under the blanket, but I stayed still. I looked at the folder, then at her. I saw the way her mother avoided my eyes, busying herself by opening napkins and arranging plastic utensils like we were really here for lunch. I didn't touch the folder. I asked, "What's that?" knowing damn well what it probably was. Vanessa gave this dry little laugh and said, "Nothing serious. Just some basic estate stuff. You know, for clarity." I knew that tone. That's the tone of someone already counting your things, already thinking about what they'll take home once you're gone. I felt sick. Not from the illness. This was a different kind of nausea. I didn't open the folder. I didn't even reach for it. I just stared at it while they talked, like I wasn't sitting right there. They dropped words like streamlining and liabilities and unknown investors, and I caught on real fast. They weren't just hoping I'd die soon. They needed me to. That's when the panic started crawling up my spine. I'd built everything, every studio, every brand deal, every damn dollar, and somehow they were sitting here in this hospital lounge, treating my empire like it was theirs to carve up. And Ethan, he wasn't even in the room. Of course not. He knew better. He let the women do the dirty work while he played the devoted husband elsewhere. I hated how quiet I felt, how voiceless, like I was strapped to this wheelchair not just physically, but emotionally too. But I nodded. I smiled. I played along. Because if they thought I was that close to the end, I could use that. When Ethan came back in, his whole face lit up like he was walking into a church. "How are my girls?" he asked, leaning down to kiss his mom and brushing his fingers against my shoulder like I was his dying treasure. The rage I felt, I almost couldn't swallow it. I clenched my jaw so tight my head started to throb. But I didn't flinch. I smiled at him too. "You just missed a whole estate planning conversation," I said, light as I could. And he didn't even blink, just laughed like it was a joke and said, "Always trying to take care of business, huh?" That's when I knew. He was in on it, not just vaguely aware, he was orchestrating it. I looked at him and saw a man I didn't recognize anymore. I thought about every night he held me while I threw up, every moment he brought me tea or wiped sweat from my forehead. And now I saw it all differently. It wasn't love, it was prep work. He was making sure the asset was secure before the transfer. They all kept chatting around me like I wasn't there. Ethan picked at the wings while Vanessa scrolled on her phone, occasionally tossing in a legal term she clearly didn't understand. His mother asked if I wanted my pillows adjusted, her voice all soft and sugar-coated, like she hadn't just watched her daughter slide a death folder across the table to me. And me? I nodded. I smiled. I said thank you. But inside, I was turning. My body was weak, but my mind was sharpening. The clues were there. Talk of bridging loans, investor pressure, Ethan taking on more responsibility. All of it framed like they were trying to help me. But this wasn't help. This was erasure. I was being erased before I'd even taken my last breath. I stared at the folder one more time, then quietly pushed it back toward Vanessa. "Not today," I said. And the way she flinched, like I'd ruined a schedule, told me everything I needed to know. By the time Ethan stood up to wheel me back to my room, I had already made my decision. I wouldn't fight them with emotion. That's what they wanted. They wanted me tired, upset, foggy. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I had clarity now, and the fire in my gut was stronger than any medicine they pumped into my IV. As we moved down the hallway, his hand warm on the wheelchair handle, I stared straight ahead and kept my face blank. But in my head, I was flipping the whole damn board. I wasn't going to die with their names on my will. I wasn't going to let them take what I built with my bare hands. I'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, trusted the wrong man, yes, but not for the last time. I wasn't sure how yet, but I'd make them regret coming into that room with takeout, fake concern, and a pen. They'd tried to plan my exit, but I was about to rewrite the ending myself. I had just adjusted the pillows behind my back when Ethan walked in holding that damn stainless steel thermos he always used for my so-called recovery tonic. He had that look on his face again, that overdone, exaggerated warmth like he was performing for someone. But it was just us. "I brought your blend, baby," he said, setting it on the tray table like it was some sacred ritual. He unscrewed the lid slowly and poured the thick golden liquid into the hospital cup, then watched me, really watched me, as I picked it up. His eyes tracked every movement like he was waiting for something. I forced a smile and brought the cup to my lips, and that smell hit me before the liquid even touched my tongue. Earthy, bitter, with something metallic underneath. That's when the memory landed hard. All those times he insisted on handling my supplements. All those moments he hovered after I took my pills. All those nights he swore the tonic would boost my liver function. It wasn't care. It was control. My hands started to tremble just slightly, and I lowered the cup before taking a full sip. My heart was pounding so loud I felt it in my ears. I faked a cough and set the cup down, careful not to spill it. "Tastes different today," I said lightly, pretending to clear my throat. Ethan leaned in, a little too eager, and said, "Yeah? Maybe I added a little extra ginger." He laughed, but it felt forced, like he was trying too hard to make everything seem normal. I gave him a quick nod, then changed the subject. "Did you talk to Vanessa today?" That threw him just enough off balance for me to see the flicker of discomfort cross his face. He recovered fast, but I caught it. "Just briefly," he said. "She's handling some paperwork stuff with Mom." And there it was again. Paperwork. Always paperwork. I kept my expression soft, weak even, but inside I was calculating every move. I told him I felt sleepy and needed to rest, and he leaned in to kiss my forehead. "Drink the rest later," he whispered. "It'll help." I closed my eyes as he walked out of the room, but the second I heard the door click shut, I opened them and stared at that cup like it was poison. And maybe it was. I reached for the call button and asked the nurse if she could bring me a sterile sample container. "For a personal lab test," I told her. "Just something my specialist wants to check." She didn't question it. When she brought the container, I waited until she left the room again, then carefully poured every drop of that tonic into it. My hands were steady this time. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was done being scared. I sealed the lid tight and tucked the container into the drawer beside my bed. Then I rinsed the cup out in the little sink by the window, just enough to make it look used. If Ethan came back in, I wanted him to believe I'd finished it. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was something else, something sharper, something closer to rage. I'd been doubting myself for weeks, thinking maybe I was paranoid, maybe I was just tired. But now I knew better. This wasn't illness. This was something being done to me. And the man doing it was the same man who claimed to love me. The guilt came in waves, not because I suspected Ethan, but because I had ignored myself for so long. How many signs had I brushed off just to keep the peace? I remembered how he always dismissed my questions, how he'd say, "You're overthinking it, babe," when I asked why I felt worse after the tonic, how he'd change the subject whenever I brought up getting a second opinion. And me? I let it go. I told myself he was just trying to help. I wanted to believe that so badly. I didn't want to believe the person I built a life with could be slowly killing me. But now, everything added up. The symptoms, the fatigue, the weird liver readings, the sudden kidney issues, no clear diagnosis, no answers, just a steady decline. And Ethan, always there with a solution, always managing what I ate, what I drank, when I slept. I wasn't crazy. I was being managed like a project, a countdown. 3 days, he said. 3 days until it was all his. I looked out the window and saw the late afternoon sun sliding behind the hospital wing across from mine. The light cast a long shadow over the bed, and I sat there feeling both smaller and stronger than I had in days. I wasn't imagining things anymore. I wasn't just dying. I was being erased. And I couldn't afford to doubt that for another second. The evidence was now in my drawer, sealed and waiting. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, who I'd call, who I could trust. But I knew this. I wouldn't drink another drop of anything he handed me. Not water, not tea, not soup. Nothing. That trust was gone. Burned. I had to protect myself now, no matter how sick I felt, no matter how much it hurt. Because if I didn't, I was handing my life over to a man who looked me in the eye and smiled while he fed me my own slow death. And I was done pretending. When the nurse came back for vitals, I asked her casually about lab protocols, who processed them, how long results took, whether patients could request private testing. She answered everything without hesitation, completely unaware of what I was really asking. And that gave me hope. Maybe there was a way to get that tonic analyzed quietly. Maybe someone outside of Ethan's reach could help me prove what I already knew in my gut. I didn't need to scream it. I didn't need to confront him. Not yet. I just needed proof. Something undeniable. Something official. I pressed my palm over my chest, feeling my own heartbeat and whispering to myself, "You're still here." Because I was. Barely, yes. But still here. And now that I was listening to myself, really listening, I wasn't going to stop. He thought he had 3 days left to wait. But I was about to turn those 3 days into something else entirely. The second Ethan walked out of the room with his "I'll grab us some coffee" excuse, I reached for my phone with a grip tighter than I expected my weak fingers could manage. My body felt fragile, like if I moved too fast I'd shatter, but my mind was locked in. I had the call screen open before I even fully registered what I was doing. His footsteps had barely faded down the hallway when I tapped Marianne Holt's name and hit dial. My thumb hovered near the end button for a second. Just 1 second. Long enough for doubt to whisper, "Is this too far?" But the line rang once, twice, and then her voice came on, brisk and no nonsense. "Marianne Holt." I didn't even greet her. I just said, "I need you at Emory today. Room 943. Bring a notary. And an independent doctor, someone who doesn't work for this hospital. It's urgent." She paused and I could hear papers shifting in the background. "Are you mentally competent?" she asked calmly. "Yes," I said, "and I need that documented too. Today." My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. I hung up before the fear could crawl back in. I'd made the call. The fuse was lit. As soon as I lowered the phone, a wave of dizziness washed over me. Not the physical kind. This was emotional, like I'd just crossed an invisible line and there was no turning back. The reality of what I'd done settled on my chest like weight. If I followed through, I wouldn't just be protecting my legacy, I'd be declaring war. On my husband, on his family, on the brand we'd carefully built together, even if I'd been the one doing most of the building. This could explode everything. But if I didn't act, I'd be gone in days, and they'd walk away with everything. My name, my company, my money. No, I couldn't let that happen. The risk of chaos was easier to accept than the quiet horror of being erased. I stared at the cup he'd left behind, the one I'd refused to drink from, and felt the decision settle into my bones. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. I had taken a step towards saving myself, and that meant I had to keep going, no matter how much it hurt. The door creaked open again, and my breath caught for a second. But it wasn't Ethan. It was Tara, the night shift respiratory therapist, the one with the quiet energy and soft hands who'd always treated me like a person, not a chart. She smiled, polite and warm, and started checking the monitors without saying much. "You breathing okay today?" she asked, glancing at the machine, then at me. I watched her for a second, then blurted out, "Can I ask you something strange?" Her eyebrows lifted, but she nodded. "Would you be willing to stay in the room later today, just as a witness? When my lawyer comes?" She blinked, caught off guard. "A witness to what?" I hesitated. "To me being sane. To me knowing exactly what I'm signing." She tilted her head slightly, searching my face for clues, but I could tell she wasn't scared. She just wanted to understand. "I trust you," I added quickly, And I know you don't owe me anything, but I need someone neutral, someone who doesn't have anything to gain." She nodded after a beat. "Yeah, I'll stay." And just like that, I had my witness. I hated how much that one yes from a stranger meant to me. It felt like oxygen after being underwater. Someone willing to be there, not for money, not for power, just there. Tara didn't press me with questions. She just said she'd come back after her rounds and gave my hand a quick squeeze before walking out again. My chest ached with something close to relief, though it was too early to really relax. I still didn't know how Ethan would react. If he'd come back with coffee and that usual mask on his face, or if he'd pick up on something being different. I practiced my expressions in the black reflection of the blank TV screen. Calm, tired, blank. The role of the dying wife, performed just right. I had to look sick enough to keep his guard down, but not too out of it when the lawyer and doctor came in. I hated that I even had to think like this, that this was my life now. But if I'd learned anything these past few weeks, it was that pretending was a survival skill. The minutes dragged. Every time a nurse passed by my door or a voice echoed down the hall, I thought it might be Ethan returning. I went over my plan again and again in my head, checking it for cracks. Marianne would bring the notary. The doctor would evaluate me. Tara would witness. I'd rewrite everything, my will, my trust, the entire structure of my estate. I wasn't just taking Ethan out of the picture. I was putting protections in place so that even if something happened to me before this all blew up, he couldn't get his hands on what he thought was already his. The guilt still nudged me, soft but persistent. This was the man I married, the man who used to dance in the kitchen with me at midnight. But those memories were dead weight now. Sentimental distractions. I had to stay sharp, because if I didn't, I'd be buried with a smile on his face and a signature he manipulated out of me. When the message from Marianne came through, "We're on our way," I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the words settle. I exhaled slowly and felt something shift inside me. Not peace, not yet, but a spark of power. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting, I was doing something. I couldn't control my body, couldn't stop the nausea, the fatigue, the chest pain, but I could control this. I could leave behind a blueprint that destroyed his plan. As I waited, I tucked the tonic sample container deeper into my drawer and straightened the blankets around me. When the door opened again and I heard the wheels of a cart, likely just dinner, I didn't even flinch. Let them bring whatever they wanted. The rules of this game were changing. He thought I was dying. What he didn't know was that I had just started to fight. The clipboard shook in my lap as Marianne placed it gently on the blanket. "We're doing this now," she said. Not with emotion, but with precision, like a surgeon preparing to cut. She stood on one side of my bed, firm and focused, and across from her was the independent physician, an older man in navy scrubs who kept adjusting his glasses and asking the competency questions like clockwork. "Can you state your full name? Your date of birth? The current president?" I answered each one clearly, with a voice steadier than I expected, even as my fingers trembled around the pen. Marianne opened the folder in front of her and flipped through the documents, explaining each one with surgical calm. Power of attorney, trust modifications, corporate control transfer, will revision. There are no second chances once you sign these, she warned. You understand that? I nodded. I understood more than anyone in that room probably realized. I was cutting out my husband, his entire family, and leaving the weight of everything I'd built in the hands of someone who didn't even ask for it. Not out of love, not out of sentiment, but out of strategy, out of survival. Tara stood by the window, arms crossed, not saying a word. Her face was unreadable, but her body was tense, like she wasn't sure if she should even be in the room. I glanced at her as Marianne continued explaining the security layers we were adding. Automatic legal alerts if anything happened to me suddenly, a sealed envelope to be opened only in court, backup instructions with the State Bar Association. It wasn't just a new will. It was a weapon, a dead man's switch. I turned to Tara and said, "I'm not doing this to be generous. I'm doing this because you're the only person in this building who has looked at me like I'm still alive. Her eyes softened a little, but she still didn't speak. Marianne looked between us and raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" she asked me one last time. "You want to leave everything to this woman you met 3 days ago?" I looked down at the contract and whispered, "Yes, she doesn't want it. That's why she's the right one." And I meant every word. I could barely grip the pen, but I signed page after page, my hand cramping, my wrist stiff. I wasn't thinking about numbers or bank accounts or real estate anymore. I was thinking about control, reclaiming it. Ethan thought he had it. He thought I was too far gone to change anything, that I'd nod along and sign whatever he slid in front of me. That I'd drink his tea and sleep my way into the afterlife like a good little wife. But he underestimated the fight left in me. My signature didn't just change the will. It changed the board structure, the rights to the company name, the protections on the intellectual property. It took back every ounce of power he'd been slowly stealing with his soft voice and perfect timing. I glanced at the doctor, who was still watching me like I might fall apart at any second, and I said, "I'm fine." And I was. At least for that moment. I was more awake than I'd been in weeks. When it was done, Marianne slipped everything back into her briefcase with the care of someone packing a loaded weapon. "This will take effect immediately," she said. "Your husband will find out soon enough." That's when Tara finally spoke. "I don't understand why you picked me." I looked at her straight. "Because you didn't try to save me. You just treated me like a person. You didn't talk down to me. You didn't ask me for anything. You noticed when I was scared. That's rare." She looked down, quiet again. I could tell she wanted to leave, like the weight of the responsibility was too much. But I also knew she wouldn't. She was already in it now, whether she liked it or not. I felt bad for pulling her into this, but not enough to stop. I needed someone clean, someone outside Ethan's reach. Tara was the last honest variable in an equation full of liars. Guilt came next, crawling up my throat the second the door closed behind Marianne and the doctor. It was thick and ugly and tried to tell me I'd gone too far, that I'd betrayed the vows I took, that I'd become manipulative myself. I sat with it for a few minutes, let it swirl in my chest, but then I thought about the folder Vanessa slid across the table like I was already dead. I thought about Ethan's voice in my ear saying, 3 days. I thought about the cup of tonic I'd poured into that sample container and how casually he'd watched me try to drink it. No. The guilt didn't get to win today. I chose survival. I chose clarity. If that made me cruel, so be it. I could live with cruel. I couldn't live with being erased. The hospital room felt colder after everyone left. I stared at the door, waiting to see Ethan's face walk through at any minute. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. If he came back smiling, I'd smile too. If he came back with questions, I'd play dumb. Let him keep believing I was broken and weak. That was my advantage now. He didn't know the will was rewritten, that the company was locked down, that the trap was already set. He thought I was still dying the way he planned. But now I held the power. I'd built a bunker inside this hospital room, and no one even noticed. And by the time they did, it would already be too late. The click of the door opening didn't fully pull me out of my half-sleep. I kept my eyes closed, just for a few seconds longer, until I felt a shift in the room. It wasn't the nurse's usual quiet routine or Ethan's soft footsteps. It was heels, sharp, confident, and perfume. A scent too bold for a hospital. I opened my eyes slowly, and there she was, standing just inside the room in a sleek beige coat, oversized sunglasses still perched on her face like she hadn't decided if she was staying long. Her voice was light, high-pitched, too rehearsed. "Hi, I'm Vanessa. No relation. Just a friend of Ethan's from the studio world. I heard what happened and wanted to stop by." She smiled, all teeth, and I watched Ethan from the corner of my eye. That man froze. Not stiff like concern, no, frozen like he'd just seen a ghost. That told me more than her entire little performance ever could. He didn't expect her here, and more importantly, he didn't want her here. My heart pounded, but I didn't let it show. I gave her a faint smile and shifted slightly in bed, like the fragile patient everyone expected me to be. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to throw something, but I didn't. I let her keep talking. Let her stumble through whatever excuse she had prepared, some story about knowing Ethan from a few collabs, how she just happened to be in town. Every word out of her mouth was trying to stretch the lie without snapping it, but it was already unraveling. She talked too much, circled back on herself, then paused awkwardly when Ethan finally cut in with, "She's had a rough morning. Maybe don't stay too long." I could have let that be the end of it, but I was done playing dead. "No, I don't mind," I said softly. "It's nice to meet someone from Ethan's other world." That was the first time she looked nervous, not rattled, but shaken just enough to blink too fast. And Ethan. His hand tightened on the back of the chair next to me, like he wanted to hold on to something. He hadn't planned for this. That was clear. She wasn't part of the act. She was a threat to it. Just as she stepped a little closer, trying to peek at the IV lines in my arm like she could casually measure how close to death I was, the door opened again, quietly this time, and in walked Marianne. No clipboard, no bag. Just that stare that could cut a man in half. She looked the woman up and down like she was scanning for a weak point. "You are?" she asked, calm as ever. The woman straightened her coat like it was armor. "I'm a friend of the family." Marianne smiled without warmth. "Then you won't mind giving them some space." There was no argument, no scene, no. Just awkward silence as the woman adjusted her sunglasses and left with a stiff nod. Ethan opened his mouth to say something, maybe explain, maybe lie, but Marianne held up a hand like a traffic cop. Not now. The silence that followed was dense. And in that quiet, I looked Ethan dead in the eye and said, "You should have picked better." He didn't respond. Couldn't. Once they were gone, both of them, the air in the room shifted again. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. My throat burned, not from sickness, but from rage. I turned my head slightly and saw Tara by the window, pretending to reorganize a tray of supplies she didn't need. She had stayed quiet the whole time, but I knew she saw everything. I waved her over, my voice low, cracked. "That wasn't just some side piece," I said. "That was part of something bigger." Tara frowned. "You think she's involved in—" "All of it," I interrupted. "The business stuff, the paperwork, the debt, the whole damn structure." Saying it out loud felt like pulling a thorn out of my own skin. Painful, but necessary. My hands were cold and my chest ached, but under all that, I felt clearer, sharper. I had named it. This wasn't about cheating. This was about conspiracy. Betrayal on a level that went beyond personal. Tara didn't speak right away. She just nodded once, then looked at me differently. Like she understood finally that this wasn't about marriage or hurt feelings. It was about survival. She sat on the edge of the chair beside me, her voice low. "You still sure about all of it? The transfer, the trust?" I met her eyes. "Yes, more now than ever." I didn't know what would come next, how Ethan would react, what new mask he'd put on. But I knew I had just exposed a fracture in his plan. That woman walking in here proved they were messy. They thought I was too far gone to notice, to understand, to fight. But they were wrong. My body might have been weak, but my mind was still mine. And in that moment, I felt stronger than I had since this whole nightmare started. Later that night, while the hospital wing fell into that eerie quiet between shift changes, I stared at the ceiling and let it all replay in my head. The tone of her voice. The way Ethan couldn't even speak when she arrived. Marianne's perfect timing. Tara's steady presence. All of it felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. For weeks, I'd been too scared to trust myself, too afraid to say what I suspected. But now, with every new crack showing in Ethan's performance, I knew I was right. This wasn't just about me dying. It was about them making sure they got everything when I did. And now? Now they'd have to play a whole different game, one I started, one I controlled. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, keep watching, keep pretending, and keep moving. I wasn't finished, not even close. Marianne spread out the papers slowly across the small rolling hospital table like she was laying down evidence in a courtroom. I was already tense before I saw a single word because the expression on her face wasn't neutral. It was grim. She didn't waste time. These are loan documents and transactional records I pulled after doing a deep dive into Ethan's business ties, she said, tapping the top sheet. Your company's assets were used as collateral. I blinked hard. Used how? My voice cracked. She didn't sugarcoat it. Ethan, with help from his mother and sister, used shell companies to link your company's value to a set of real estate ventures. Commercial flips in Florida and South Carolina. All of them tanked. Millions lost. I felt my whole chest go cold. He used my business to back personal deals? She nodded. Without your knowledge, but with forged consent signatures. It's deep, the kind of thing that gets buried under layers of LLCs. I put my hand to my forehead. I felt dizzy, sick, like I might throw up. I thought I was just battling a marriage. This was theft. This was structural. It wasn't just betrayal, it was invasion. I stared at the numbers, big ones, next to my company's name. How? I whispered. How the hell didn't I see this? Marianne hesitated, then spoke softly. Because they didn't want you to. Because they worked as a unit. And because you trusted him. The shame hit me like a slap. I'd spent my entire adult life building my business from the ground up. I knew every square inch of my first gym. I used to sleep in the back room between shifts. I gave Ethan access because I thought I was building a life with him. I let him in too far. And now, the thing I created, the one thing that was supposed to be mine, was infected with debt and lies. They could have destroyed everything, I muttered. They still might, Marianne said. That's why we're not just rewriting your estate. We're building a case. I nodded slowly, but inside I felt like the ground had cracked beneath me. This wasn't just a failed marriage. This was a setup. Marianne kept going. I also ran background on Ethan's early business filings. He used to operate under a different last name, Gaines. Changed it just before he met you. There's a sealed fraud case in Ohio. Petty, small-time scams. Got dismissed because of his uncle, an attorney. Quiet political ties. My mouth went dry. So he's done this before? In smaller ways, she confirmed. This is the biggest one yet. I stared at the ceiling, bile creeping up my throat. Every date night, every late-night brainstorm, every strategy meeting we had, he was probably already thinking 10 steps ahead. I thought I'd partnered with someone who respected my vision. But he was just casing the place, measuring the walls before the robbery. And I invited him in. I married it. I co-signed my own sabotage. My chest ached, but it wasn't illness. It was grief. Grief for my own blindness. I pushed the papers away gently and looked at Marianne. What happens now? She didn't hesitate. We put protections in place. You've already rewritten the will. Now we start gathering the rest. Financials, emails, property records. We secure the business legally before they realize they've lost control of it. And we prepare a full legal complaint just in case they push back. I felt the weight of it pressing down, but under the pressure was something else. Resolve. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was strategizing. They're gonna come for me harder now, I said. If they know it's slipping. Marianne nodded. That's why we stay 2 steps ahead. My jaw clenched. For the first time, I didn't just want to survive this. I wanted to win. I wanted them exposed. I wanted their network picked apart and held up to the light. The guilt crept back in quiet, like smoke. Not just for what I missed, but for what I allowed. I'd let Ethan speak for me in meetings. I'd let Vanessa sit in on strategy calls even though she barely knew how to read a balance sheet. I brushed off the discomfort because I didn't want to fight. I wanted harmony. I wanted love, and they used that against me. I should have seen it, I whispered. Marianne didn't flinch. You were building. They were plotting. There's a difference. That line stuck with me, because it was true. I'd been dreaming while they'd been scheming, and now I had to wake up fast. I looked at the financials again. This wasn't a cleanup job. This was extraction. I had to pull my name, my work, my future out of the wreckage they'd tried to bury me under. And I had to do it while hooked up to an IV, with poison still possibly in my system. As Marianne packed up the files, I made a promise to myself, quiet but solid. This wouldn't end with a courtroom victory or a press release. It had to go deeper. I would not only recover what they stole, I would make sure they could never do this to anyone else again. We don't just prepare the will, I said aloud, almost to myself. We prepare the case. Marianne gave a small nod, but I could see the respect in her eyes. She knew I was no longer the scared patient waiting for death. I was the architect of their downfall now. And even if my body was still weak, my mind had claws. I would use every ounce of what I had left to burn their paper empire to the ground and rebuild mine in fireproof stone. The hallway outside the ICU smelled like chemicals and something metallic I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was just fear. I had rolled myself halfway out of my room when I heard the two doctors talking, low and tense, just around the corner near the nurses' station. They didn't know I was listening. It's showing markers consistent with slow-acting organophosphates, one of them said. But there's no external source logged, no prescriptions, no exposures. The other one shook his head. This isn't accidental. This looks deliberate, chronic. That's when it hit me like a punch to the ribs. I pressed both hands to my lap to steady myself, but the tremble in my arms gave me away. Tara appeared behind me a second later, quietly moving the chair back into the room. "You shouldn't be out here," she whispered. But I couldn't speak yet. My brain was still catching up to what my body already knew. Poison. I wasn't just sick, I was being poisoned. Back in my room, Marianne was already seated with her tablet open, scanning emails and notes, while I sat there trying not to cry. When I told her what I heard, she didn't flinch. She just looked up and said, "Then it's time." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Call hospital security. And law enforcement." I couldn't believe the words coming out of my mouth. My marriage had become a crime scene. My home, our kitchen, our bedroom, every cozy moment we'd had, was now potential evidence. And that burned, not in a dramatic way, not like in movies, but in a quiet, exhausting, shameful way. I felt like a fool, like I'd ignored every signal my body and instincts had tried to scream at me. I signed the consent forms for the toxicology confirmation, and Tara stood beside me the whole time. She didn't say anything, just rested her hand on my shoulder while I signed. That small gesture grounded me more than anything else. As I signed each form, my hand slow and clumsy, the weight of it all started to settle on me. The fact that someone I once loved, someone who kissed my forehead and tucked me in at night, had been slowly feeding me something designed to end me. And I drank it. I trusted him enough to drink it. The shame of that knocked the air out of me more than the diagnosis. I could barely meet Tara's eyes, but when I finally looked at her, she didn't flinch or pity me. She just nodded, like she understood that this was about more than survival. It was about justice and control, and the right to write my own ending. The ICU nurse returned with a clipboard and a sealed bag for the sample I'd hidden, and I handed it over without a word. I didn't need to say it anymore. The evidence could speak for me now, but the truth still sat in my chest like a stone. "I want you to document everything," I told Marianne once the nurse left. "Every contact Ethan made with my doctors, every prescription he picked up, every appointment he came to alone." She typed quickly, already ahead of me. "We're going to get subpoenas for his emails," she said. "And once the lab confirms the sample, we move forward with a formal criminal complaint." I nodded, then paused. "He's going to know." "He already knows you're slipping away from him," she said. "What he doesn't know is that you're slipping into power." That line stayed with me, even when my stomach turned and the pain returned to my lower back. I didn't feel powerful. I felt broken and betrayed. But I also felt something else, cold and sharp and growing with every hour, clarity, rage, and a strange kind of freedom. By the time the lab tech arrived with new testing kits, I had signed half a dozen forms and answered more questions about my symptoms than I could remember. Each one made the reality more concrete. This wasn't some rare autoimmune crash. This was calculated, layered, designed to mimic illness just enough to avoid suspicion. But not anymore. Not with this trail we were building. Tara stayed longer than her shift required, quietly organizing things in the room while I went through the final round of questioning. I think she knew I wasn't ready to be alone. And she didn't offer empty comfort. She offered presence. That was enough. More than enough. When the tech left, I stared out the window as the evening light dipped below the hospital wing. It's not just survival anymore, I said to no one in particular. It's justice now. And for the first time, I really meant it. When Marianne left that night, she turned at the door and said, "You didn't imagine it. You didn't invent it. You're not crazy." I nodded once, but it wasn't just relief I felt. It was rage cooling into resolve. Ethan had weaponized my trust. He'd made my love into a weakness. But now that truth was on paper, in samples, in legal files with my name on them. There was no taking it back. And if I ever doubted myself again, all I had to do was remember that hallway, that doctor's voice, that one word, poison. That word would be my anchor, my warning, my fuel. And from here on out, I wasn't asking for permission to live. I was demanding it, with proof. The chair in that courtroom felt harder than any hospital bed I'd slept in. I sat upright, hands folded in my lap to hide the tremble, while the wood-paneled walls and cold lighting made everything feel smaller. Atlanta's courthouse smelled like old paper and too much air conditioning. Ethan was 2 rows away with his attorney, both dressed like grief itself, black suits, tight jaws. But it was all performance. I could see it now with perfect clarity. The moment the judge entered and we stood, my knees wobbled, but I didn't fall. I couldn't afford to. I looked at Ethan's back-straight posture, at the way he never turned around, and I promised myself, today I speak. His lawyer started with a smile, the kind that's trained. "Mrs. Grant is clearly in a vulnerable mental and physical state," he said. "She's been influenced, possibly manipulated." The will changes were abrupt and uncharacteristic. I stayed silent, but I felt heat rise in my chest. Then he leaned in harder. "We must consider that grief, illness, and confusion may have impacted her judgment." That's when I almost laughed. Confusion? No, I wasn't confused. I'd been targeted, then awakened. And now I was here to expose it all. My attorney stood, calm and crisp, and simply said, "We'd like to enter medical documentation and a toxicology report into the record." That changed the air in the room. Fast. The judge raised an eyebrow, looked over his glasses, then nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom technician took the flash drive and loaded the files. And just like that, my body, my illness, became proof. Not weakness, not hysteria, not confusion. Proof. The toxicology report lit up on the screen, showing traces of long-term exposure to specific compounds used in pesticides, uncommon in daily life, impossible to ingest by accident. The same compounds found in the tonic Ethan insisted I take every day. The same tonic I'd stopped drinking. I didn't look at him yet. I wanted him to feel the shift before I even moved. My attorney read out the timeline, my symptoms, my decline, my sudden improvement after rejecting all supplements brought by Ethan. Every word made the room feel tighter, like truth was sucking the oxygen out of his defense. Ethan finally looked at me when I took the stand. I didn't need to speak long, just enough. I spoke about the way he always brought me my drinks, how he deflected when I wanted second opinions, how his family began circling like vultures as soon as I was too weak to stand. I told the court I'd created a legal safeguard not out of spite, but out of survival. My body told me something was wrong before my mind could name it, I said. But once I knew, I acted. My voice shook once, just once, and then steadied. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was methodical. When I stepped down, I looked directly at Ethan. He was pale now, sweat on his upper lip. Not from guilt, he wasn't capable, but from exposure. This was the first time his mask cracked in public, and I didn't look away. Back at my seat, I took a slow breath. I wasn't here for revenge, not anymore. Revenge implies I wanted to hurt him back. No. What I wanted was to reclaim my name, my decisions, my truth. I'd spent weeks being doubted, diminished, medicated into silence. But now my story was being said out loud in a courtroom, with my signature on every document, my blood in every test result. This wasn't a private fight anymore. It was real, legal, recorded, and it belonged to me. Ethan's attorney kept trying to pivot, to call it all suspicion and inference, but the judge didn't interrupt when my lawyer calmly reminded him that motive, opportunity, and physical evidence had already met. The room didn't need drama, it needed facts, and we had them. When the session ended for the day, the judge announced that the documents would remain in the official record, pending further testimony. I stayed seated for a few seconds after everyone else stood. I needed to feel the weight of it, to sit with it. Tara, seated quietly a few benches behind, gave me a small nod when our eyes met. That tiny gesture felt like a mountain under my feet. I'd made it here. Alive, heard, believed. I still had to heal, still had to rebuild. But today wasn't about recovery, it was about reclamation. As I stood and walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel like a woman escaping a deathbed. I felt like someone walking back into her life, one truth, one step, one breath at a time. The pen moved slowly across the paper, but my hand didn't shake this time. I was sitting in my home office, sunlight spilling in through the window blinds, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the air around me felt still. Not heavy, just still. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm finally passes. The new locks on the front door had been installed yesterday, 2 deadbolts, reinforced hardware, and a digital entry code only I knew. There was a new security system too, quietly humming from a sleek panel near the hall. Necessary now. Not out of fear, but because I refused to feel unprotected in my own space ever again. Marianne's assistant slid the final set of documents toward me. Restructuring forms, board control transfers, full reinstatement of my rights as CEO. All yours again, she said. I signed, initialed, signed again. And that was it. My name, my work, my future, all officially back under my control. No more shadows. There was no applause, no deep music playing like in movies. Just the simple sound of the paper sliding back into the folder. And peace. Not joy, not triumph, just clean, sharp peace. I had cut away something rotten. Ethan's name had been removed from every file. His family no longer had access to anything tied to my company or my accounts. The lawsuits against them were moving forward, slow but steady. There would be depositions, hearings, lawyers playing games, but I wouldn't be in a hospital bed this time. I'd be seated, alert, present. The infection was gone. What was left now was healing. Not the soft kind with candles and comfort, but the real kind, cutting out what hurt you and letting the scar remind you not to forget. It was never about destroying him. It was about removing him. There's a difference. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just done letting people hurt me without consequence. Tara came by later that afternoon. She looked tired. Her shift must have been brutal, but she smiled when she walked in, holding a simple envelope. Inside were the final revisions to the trust. Everything we'd talked about was now official. Her share of the protections, the clause shielding her from liability, and the fund she didn't ask for but damn well deserved. You didn't have to do all this, she said, sitting on the edge of the chair across from me. You could have picked anyone. I shrugged. But I didn't. I picked you, and I'd do it again. She held the papers carefully, like they might burn her fingers. This changes my life, she whispered. I looked her in the eye and said, You helped save mine. We didn't hug. It wasn't a moment for that. But the respect between us was deep, quiet, unshakable. We were strangers once, tied together by chaos. Now we were survivors with linked stories, and both of us knew that mattered more than money ever could. After she left, I sat with the blueprint on my desk, the first draft of a new foundation, a nonprofit focused on women's health, especially for those whose symptoms go ignored or misdiagnosed, like mine were. I'd named it the Second Voice Project, because sometimes the first voice, the doctor, the husband, the system, isn't the one you should trust. Sometimes you need a second voice, steady and clear, saying, "Something's wrong and we believe you." That's what I'd become for myself. That's what Tara became for me. And now I wanted to create something that could become that for other women who don't get the benefit of the doubt when their bodies fail and no one listens. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about making sure no other woman sat in a hospital bed, questioning her own instincts while someone smiled and handed her poison. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall for a long time. The old photos were gone, the wedding pictures, the framed press clippings with Ethan smiling at my side. I'd taken them down the night I got home, replaced them with framed sketches of my first studio space, handwritten client thank you notes, my first bank deposit slip, $132.12, from a pop-up class I taught in a parking lot. That's what mattered. That's what was real. I had rebuilt before. I could do it again. And this time, no one was getting in unless I opened the door myself. No one was signing anything unless I said so. No one was sitting at my table pretending to love me while plotting my funeral. That era was over, and I didn't need closure. I needed progress. I was already halfway there. When I shut the folder and stood up, my body still ached in places that didn't fully make sense. Healing is weird like that. It doesn't ask your permission or your timeline. But I was standing, on my own feet, in my own house, with my name on everything again. And that meant something. I wasn't the woman in the hospital bed anymore. I wasn't the wife quietly dying under her husband's careful routine. I wasn't the brand being quietly bled dry by a smiling family. I was Alicia Grant, and my name, my real name, was no longer something they could twist or claim or use. It was mine again, and whatever came next, I'd face it knowing exactly who I was. Friends, thank you for sitting with me through this story and for holding space for everything I had to face to get my life and my name back. If my journey moved you even a little, please tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from, because it reminds me we're not alone in the hard chapters. I'd be so grateful if you liked this video and subscribed to the channel. It truly helps these real-life stories reach the people who might need them most. Your support means more than you know, and I don't take a second of it for granted. And if this story kept you thinking, you'll find more stories like mine here, about betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that comes when a woman finally chooses herself. Until the next one, thank you for listening, with love and respect.